Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for today's POAM podcast. Live and in person today, we have Dave LaMontagne and Gordana Masavsky, along with me, Jim Tiganelli. We are live actually from the POAM offices at 27056 Joy Road in Redford. And for those of you that got the memo and know that we were live at this particular time, we're welcoming your tweets, if I said that right, or your Facebook posts at MIPOAM on Twitter and at MIPOAM on Facebook. Dave is over here today actually monitoring these, and if we do get questions during the broadcast, we're going to do our best to deal with them. Those who may see this at a later date that choose to send something along, we will certainly go over them all and do what we can to respond to them and reply to them, and we're looking for ideas you might have regarding today's broadcast and any future topics that you might like to have us cover. We've got Tyler and Reese in the Beltway Bureau here helping to produce and direct this still, and I know that that's a miracle in itself that they can actually herd these three cats together to get something done right, but we appreciate their help and their professionalism. Now, we're here today to talk a little bit about, and I get these questions, actually was in Lansing only today where they're asking a question about staffing. And people don't seem to understand what an impact it has, and I know that you've had several questions on this, and I thought perhaps between us and maybe anybody that communicates with us from the outside, maybe we could deal with some of your thoughts on it.
We want to talk a little bit today about the difficulty that police officers are facing with regard to low staffing and, why that's happening. And you two obviously are retired police officers, you from Fraser and Dave here from Monroe. And so you guys can talk, let us know what the loss of officers or decline of sworn officers kind of entering the workforce today, how that's affecting everybody else with regard to, I've heard over and over that officers are working like 16 plus hours.
Yeah, that's for
I mean,
sure.
that's insane.
Well, it's unavoidable, and we know that, and this comes from Lansing statistics, not our own, that since 2001, the number of sworn officers in Michigan had gone down by about 20%. And while that might be somewhat population-driven in some of the larger towns like Detroit or Flint or Saginaw or Pontiac and such, the geographic area, the amount of crime and things that continue to occur really sometimes are even enhanced by poor economic times. Right. But I think what I've been able to, and I would like to use the city of Saginaw as an example. I mean, I love my guys in Saginaw, and they are all good guys and gals up there. But at one point in time, in 2001, we had 173 sworn officers there. Literally at 11 o'clock, between 11 and 12 o'clock at night, you had 30 cars on the road in the city of Saginaw. Last night, we had 4.
Oh, my God.
Okay, and it's not because crime has gone down by 90%. It's because, and really the population that is reduced, that does not reduce the amount of crime that goes on. I mean, some of those that are left behind are where some of that stuff occurs. And so in the biggest, simplest picture of it, you go from 173, we were down as low as 37 police officers. We went from having 8 two-man cars to having 4 one-man cars. These are the types of things that occur. And now we're back up to about 50, I think I heard today, 57 or 59. So, and they're so enthused about the fact that they've gone from 39, say, to 59. But most of the people that are there don't recall having worked with 170. And, you mentioned a number of things, and I'll just go through them briefly, and I know Dave has his own examples. But in Saginaw in 2001, we had about 24 what were called community police officers. And I think you've even asked about that as, like a community policing officer. It was more than a title. It was actually a way of policing where they would put you in a specific neighborhood, maybe even in plain clothes, maybe even going to church functions, maybe as a police officer, but you were the neighborhood. If you go back 50 years, you were like the beat cop.
Right.
This was our guy. When we had a problem, we called Gordana. we didn't call the police department. Gordana could handle it. And we had more than 20 of those in the city of Saginaw in 2001. No, that's when you had 170 cops. Now you have 59. You have, I think there's one community policing officer, and that's just like he's sort of an ombudsman. Take that to the other extreme you mentioned, overtime. When you try to fill 170 8-hour slots, for that platoon or that department, and you take it and you have to fill that number of slots with a third as many people, it's just unavoidable that you're going to have, because people still get sick, people still take a vacation, and emergencies still happen. So the staffing thing has just, it's got a dozen tentacles. Training, how do we send someone to training when we don't have enough people to work the actual essential services?
It's sort of like an avalanche, a snowball that just
Yeah,
keeps
it
getting
is,
bigger and
and
bigger.
you can't stop it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you just add a bunch of people, and what we're finding now, and all departments are, and certainly POM's aware of it, is we couldn't, if we had the money to go to 100 officers in Saginaw, it would literally take us a decade to find those other 40 guys. Because this job is not one that you post on a board and say, hey, you want to be a police officer? These are things that they're cultural, sometimes genetic, where a person grows up with the mindset that he wants or she wants to be a police officer. They don't decide it at 30, or if they do, they're deciding it because they just need a job.
Yeah.
And it changes it.
So, Dave, you are very recently retired as a law enforcement.
Yes.
What's happening here? I mean,
Well, I think if you really need to back up and start talking about, why is this occurring?
right.
And, this profession has been diminished by the media. The prestige of the profession has been diminished significantly. The benefits, the paid benefits have been diminished for a variety of reasons. And there, Jim mentioned 9/11, and 9/11 seems to be the line of delineation that talks about, how many officers were on the job then and then now. And there's over 6,000 open police jobs in this state. And this is a significant problem that is not, as Jim mentioned, it could take a decade to fix it. It's not going away anytime soon. So,
Those aren't unfunded jobs, those are unfilled jobs, right?
yeah, like there's places you talk about, Jim, that don't have any issues, offer good pay, offer good benefits, and they still can't hire people.
Sterling Heights, Livonia, two of the finest towns in the state, can't hire enough people.
So I think that, you got to understand that, the diminishment of the prestige of the job is a significant driving force. You think about millennials and, as they decide, what do they want to do for a career or a job or whatever they're doing that week. This ain't it, right? This job is difficult to get. It's difficult to keep. Requires significant commitment, and not everybody can do that.
Hey, Dave, think about this. It just came to me as you're talking. Over the years, I remember having many occasions where certain communities, I remember when Houston went crazy 30 years ago in the oil boom and such, and everybody in Michigan was able to leave and go get a job in Houston. And then there was the South Florida times. You know what? I don't remember. Now, here we are with 6,000 open jobs. I don't see this urgency to recruit, or for people in other states to say, hey, I'm going to Michigan where I can be a police officer. And I think I know the answer to why they're not coming here. I mean, teachers go to North Carolina or whatever. Give me your idea, or maybe Gordon, if you've read these things, how come everybody isn't running to Michigan to get a job as a police officer, even if there's a job available?
Well, I think that's an interesting point that you bring up, and you know full well that we've been in Washington, D.C. advocating on behalf of local law enforcement on this particular issue. And, if you think about this state, we're like basically a one-horse town, right? We do one thing, we make cars, right? So when people think about, am I going to go to Michigan to take a job, this is not necessarily something that crops up. And locally, police departments and to a larger extent, the state doesn't do any kind of advertising. They don't do any kind of promotions. They're not trying to acquire new members, or they're not trying to reach out to people in other states, come to Michigan and take this job. So, there's a number of forces outside of our control, as the union representing the vast majority of police officers in this state. So we don't necessarily, get to tell the state, hey, maybe you should talk about, coming to this state, getting this job and doing this career here.
You know, Dave, maybe I'm an old free market guy, probably. But it would seem to me that if people really had a need for them and they really wanted to hire them, who would have to tell them to go recruit out of state? I mean, did someone tell Houston? Did someone tell Fort Lauderdale? Did someone tell Phoenix? My guess is what happens is we've made this job in Michigan, as you indicated, this is an honorable occupation, always has been, continues to be. But this is a job, and yeah, we are more monitored than probably anyone on earth. Body camera, body mic, rear seat camera, GPS, drones. Gosh, you name it. I mean, you can't. I won't even tell you about the things you can't do in this job anymore. But what I think has happened, and you've spent a lot of time with our legislative program in Michigan here. Why is it that guys aren't thriving to come here, and do you think the reason that a lot of this organized recruiting doesn't happen is because no one comes to the table and says, oh gosh, I'd love to come to Michigan? Do you think that the contracts, do you think there are other mitigating factors here that have caused guys in other states to say, I wouldn't go if they asked, type of a thing, to Michigan?
Well, I don't know if you can, break it down in terms of, contractual issues. I think that, overall, the profession is viewed dimly now when it was not always the case, as you mentioned. We still feel like this is an honorable profession. And most of the people we represent think this is an honorable profession, but we're in the minority, right? So it used to be that, when you grew up as a kid, people looked at police officers and they were, people of integrity and honesty and somebody that you could go to if you were in trouble. And now it's like, if you don't shape up, Junior, the policeman's going to take you to jail kind of discussion. So there's a number of factors driving this thing. A lot of it has to do with, our state requires a licensing component, and you have a year from obtaining that license to get a police job someplace. And it kind of drives people to, go to work to places they don't necessarily want to work at, and then that doesn't lead necessarily to good outcomes. So
they take the first job that's available.
That's right.
They only got a year. Let me give you follow up on that if I could. In Ann Arbor, okay, we call it the pearly gates. I mean, what is it, 6 square miles surrounded by reality? I mean, it's a great town to go to work in. As a
Right.
police officer, nobody's going to reject this place. They actually went so far in that town, you talk about recruiting, to offer to pay for the police academy, which that happens outside the city of Detroit or the MSP. I'm not sure of anybody doing it in Michigan. There may be some rare occasions. But they said they would send up to 5 people to the police academy, pay them their wage, provide them health care, and provide them seniority on successful completion of the academy. And they only got 1 person in Ann Arbor. So I'm inclined to think that all these things that you've mentioned, Dave, and then maybe we've all talked about, are true. But I do think Michigan is different. And you remember the right to work discussions a few years ago, back in 2012, Valerie? The reason that we need to have this right to work program is because it'll attract more talented people to come to Michigan. Because the unions have driven the costs through the ceiling. Good grief, where that ceiling is must be right about here. And what's happened is, in spite of all that, I don't see all these guys saying, "Hey, well, now Michigan is the place to be." I think Michigan has all the issues that all the states do, as far as the honor of a police officer, the continual tracking of everything you do, and if you watch the news, we all just put a uniform on at night because we just want to go do something bad. There's none of this good stuff. But I think Michigan's got its own anchor hanging around itself at the same time, and I think a lot of it is what the legislature and the economy has done, ultimately placed on the backs of those collective bargaining agreements.
I'm glad that you actually brought that up, because Dave, you're obviously not only a retired police officer, but a very active business agent who's also been quite active in Lansing. And so can you tell us what you're currently involved in trying to attract more people to become police officers and fill these positions?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, we spend a tremendous amount of time, both at Washington D.C. and in Lansing, advocating for, you know, local police officers. And the issue is that, you know, they've driven down. I say they. I'm talking about, you know, the people that sit across the bargaining table from us have driven down the level of benefit and the level of pay to the point where Jim will tell you he's got people that he represents that are getting government assistance that they can't afford to feed their kids. Their kids are in school getting free lunches. And if you want to have a, you know, this is not the profession where, you know, you want to be having those discussions, right? It's supposed to be highly paid, highly trained, tremendous amount of authority, tremendous amount of responsibility. And when you drive down these benefits and you drive down you diminish the prestige of the job, you're not going to get the best candidates. And that is something that municipalities all across this state have been struggling with recently, is they're lowering their standards. And, you know, nobody seems to want to talk about the benefit side of it, that, you know, they cry the blues, cry poverty. In some cases, you know, they're real issues. We understand that. But there's been no correlating discussion about, you know, how do we, you know, fix this? How do we, you know, get the benefits back to where they need to be? How do we get, you know, start to get back to where we were, you know, pre 9/11? And it seems like a very antiquated, you know, time to go back to. But I mean, the facts are that you know, we were at one state recession. And, you know, in many places we're still in it, and in our surrounding states have come out of it, and we haven't, and that's causing issues. I did want to say though, Jim, we had got two tweets here on the MIPOAM, and one is from a hashtag. It says hashtag #TIG. It's from Dan Patrick. And Dan Patrick wants to know, how do staffing levels impact the safety of the officers working?
Well, I think when you talk about the overtime end of it, this actually just was passed on to me. If you want to pass that down to Dave there, he might have got the same thing. The fatigue value, the person's working 16 hours a day, working 30 hours of overtime a week, plus a 12-hour shift or an 8-hour shift. Fatigue is a big deal in any job. I mean, that's how accidents happen, if it's in an injection mold plant or, you know, a place hanging tailgates. But on our job, where they assume that you're armed, they assume that, you know, you're the guy there with the handcuffs, we are already, from a bad guy's perspective, we're already seen as a threat. So how can it happen? It's, to me, the fatigue is a big part of it. And having to do that, working that forced overtime and working more dangerous hours like that, more dangerous in the fact that you're so more tired than you might normally have been. So it has a big part of it, and I think that also causes some good candidates to decide that that's not a job they want either. It's not just about the money. They have lives outside of business too. Divorces, illness, sickness, all those things could be an outgrowth of that fatigue.
You know, Jim, the fatigue component is something that's really not normally associated when we talk about, you know, staffing levels and forced overtime. Employers don't traditionally recognize this notion that repeated 16-hour shifts over a significant amount of time. And I think about our guys in Wayne County. If you show up to work, you're going to be mandated. They have face-to-face relief there in the jail. It's not a nice place to work, and you know, there's some good people down there doing a difficult job, and they get compelled to stay. They don't have a choice; they have to stay, and that happens more often than not because they can't hire enough people there, and they can't hire enough people for a variety of reasons, a lot of which we've mentioned. But you want to talk about safety. If you work 16 hours after 16 hours after 16 hours, multiple days, then your decision-making ability declines significantly. Fatigue weighs in. You know, your brain doesn't work the same way. Right?
You know
You're
what
not
also
making good
happens,
decisions.
Dave, is they run out of people to work the overtime. I'll give you one of my counties up in the thumb where they have 13 corrections officers, 3 on duty at a time. and they have 90 beds, 15 federal prisoners in this jail. This is a small county. So you have 2 people on the main floor and 1 person on the second floor, and you have 90 prisoners, 15 of them federal prisoners. That 1 person on that second floor has to make sure that everybody is breathing and fed and not fighting with each other. And because they only have 3, or they need 3, they can't get that person to come in. When somebody calls in sick there, it's always overtime. And when that happens, you miss things. And then they get disciplined for it.
Well, let's talk about the stress that happens when you are exhausted, when you've been working, every day 16 hours. You take into account all of the factors that just go along with daily life. Now you're
That's very true.
exhausted, you're stressed out, resentful, whatever it is, whatever human emotion that you're feeling, those kinds of things can have pretty serious repercussions.
On both ends, that with and without the uniform. I mean,
Absolutely
like
right.
I think you're saying, if you got a couple of kids, maybe the spouse is also working,
Yeah.
him or her. And so part of your responsibility as mom or dad is to, take the kids to school or take them to the daycare or stay home with them yourself. And then you're working the balance of it. So not only do you put yourself at risk on the job, it does create some real difficult times at home, potentially. I mean, we all know that the divorce rates are high, but it can cause you to do things.
Right.
And it is a stress, I think, is probably the general term is the most accurate one you could say. It
Yeah.
creates stress in many ways.
That's another good point. People don't necessarily think about when you come to work, okay, and you pin on the tin star and you put your bulletproof vest on, strap on your gun. The assumption is that you've left all that stuff at the door, okay, and we know that that's not true. That doesn't happen, and that bleeds over. You guys have so eloquently pointed out, it bleeds over on the job side, and it also bleeds over on the home side, right? I worked with a crusty policeman in Hamtramck many, many moons ago, and he would often quip that he would have to wear his name tag home so his wife knew who he was. So that's how much overtime he was working. And that is not necessarily, great on either side.
And it's not far-fetched either.
No.
It's a lot to it.
Jim, I got, apparently somebody's paying attention here, so our Twitter feed is blowing up here. So we've got Gary from Plymouth. He just said that he just tweeted in that he's just enjoying the podcast. And apparently,
Thank you, Gary.
yeah, thanks, Gary. Appreciate that.
Commercial-free.
And we're apparently we're reaching into Denver because we got a question from Sarah from Denver.
The miracle of
Wow.
satellites.
It's crazy. I don't know if that says anything about us or about Sarah, but the question is there a
Bring
place,
home milk, or is it, did
No.
she hit it the right button? Okay.
Is there a place or website I can go to find available jobs? So good question. The POAM website, we post job openings that we get sent all the time. And people can always go to POAM.net and look on there, and they'll find job sites posted on there. The MCOL's website has job postings on there, and you see that that appears in our Twitter feed because we have some fine folks that help us out with that stuff, as you guys know, and those things appear. Like we'll put those job openings, and it'll appear on our Twitter feed. It appears on our Facebook page, and you can always go there. You should follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and you'll be in the know on all this stuff.
You know what? Just to follow up on you talking about the training and hiring, we have been struggling in Washington, D.C. now for about 5 years with Senator Peters. I should put a good word in for Senator Gary Peters. He's always been very loyal to the Police Officers Association of Michigan and law enforcement. And one of the things he's working on in D.C. for us, at our request, is to take some existing money, like COPS grants and such as that. Because what's happening is the COPS grants are designed so after a guy is certified, after a guy has been hired, how do we pay him? What we're trying to do is get part of that COPS grant money. And what did we say, Dave? About 11 grand, a guy could go through the academy and get about 400 hours a week. I forget what the exact numbers were.
Wasn't a lot.
It was under 15,000. I feel comfortable saying that. Where if the feds would say to you, you go interview 10 people and find the guy or gal that you want, Like, why do you want to work here? Well, my dad owns a farm up the road, or my wife works in the local hospital, or, my husband runs a small business over here. Instead of, why do you want to work here? Well, my certification is going to run out in a couple of months, and if I don't take a job, I'm screwed. Okay, so we need to get past that. So we've actually gone to Senator Peters on this, and if you think the wheels turn slowly in Washington, D.C., no, they go in reverse most of the time. And what we've asked them to do was take some existing money for law enforcement hiring, and then if you, as an employer, or city mayor or manager, want to hire somebody, you find the right guy. And when you find the right guy, you apply this application, and they reimburse you for the academy time
Oh, like a
and the
referral.
wages. That's right.
Oh,
So
excellent.
you get to hire the guy you really want and the guy that really wants to work here.
Yeah.
I went to a large church up in Saginaw one time when we were having a hard time hiring. And that church had done a lot of advertising on a variety of things. And one of the things that I had suggested to them was, instead of hanging a couple of those billboards, if you would take that money, because it was a very large church, if you would find somebody in that church has a kid that would be a really good police officer, but he's never going to be able to find 15 weeks off of whatever job he has to go get academy trained on the promise that he might get asked to work here.
Right, yeah, of course.
So if this church would take that money and sponsor a kid, go to the employer, say, we'll pay to have him put through, do the background checks, find out if he's healthy, find out if he's a good candidate, and if the city decides this is our guy, we'll pay for him. And it didn't happen, by the way.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
I just want you to know that there are continuing efforts out there, but
Yeah.
they're not gaining any traction in Michigan or in D.C. Nobody wants to do anything with money that they have not already spent. So
Well,
one
we'll
of those
keep
deals.
trying to push those through, right?
It is a big deal, yeah.
We got another tweet here. Dawn from Romulus says she appreciates all the police
Hi, Don.
and has enjoyed
You know
our
Dawn?
previous podcasts.
No.
So she sounds like she's a fan of the podcast here. So that's
I'm
good.
just, I'm kind of, I don't want to say overwhelmed because you know how easy that is, but surprised that there are people actually listening to this.
Well, there was a couple of
From a
tweets here I
distance.
couldn't necessarily repeat. But,
So I think we are just about out of time here, but we want to talk about maybe what we will discuss next time. And that will deal with mental health and all those things that are offered to police officers under times of stress.
You know what, and could we add, if there's time for that, some of the specific or less widely known types of disabilities that we run into with people on the job. We're hearing more and more about autistic
All right.
people.
Yeah, we're definitely
hearing
going to talk about that, like how to deal with disabilities that are sort of new and become more
Maybe
popular
we
as
could get
time goes on.
like a Dr. Wolf, who's the,
Yeah.
POAM psychologist,
Yeah.
or somebody to talk about.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's two-folded, or maybe these are different podcasts. This, the mental health of the employee and their families, which,
Right.
POAM Lifeline does offer that service. 937, what is it, 5105, Dave, do you remember?
yep.
Yeah, 313-937-5105. That's totally private. We don't know who calls. That goes right to Dr. Wolf and Marilyn Knight, and that can be for home problems. I mean, drinking problems, gambling problems.
Anything.
And
Work problem,
He's been
anything.
doing our stuff for 25 years, but maybe that's a guy we need to involve on that. Maybe we can even do him on a live feed on the telephone.
Yeah.
But I think that I remember dealing with epileptic persons 20-some years ago, and it was relatively new to me at the time. But I think I hear more about autism and some of the other things that are being dealt with, that if an officer doesn't recognize it, it can affect the way that he handles that particular situation. And maybe that bit of education, maybe we can give some background or some input or
Yeah.
some resources for
Yeah,
him.
we definitely plan on talking about all of those things and definitely talking to some people who have a lot of expertise in the area. So stay tuned to our next podcast. We're excited to bring that to you hopefully soon.
Yeah, if you keep an eye on where will we put that Twitter and Facebook, Dave, we'll put on when we're going to do it live, so that if they do want to contact us. So keep an eye out on that. Contact us at MIPOAM, Twitter and on Facebook. And we look forward to hearing from you, and watch for the next time of the live cast, and maybe you can even join us here in studio. So thanks
All
a
right.
lot. Thank you guys both for today, and
Thank you.
thanks to Reese and Tyler from the Beltway Bureau. And, well, I guess we'll have to wait to see what it looks like when you're done. I don't know. We maybe giving all this credit too early, but
Right.
thank you all. Appreciate it.
Have a good
See
day.
us next time.